This is Love Your Work. On this show, we help you make it as a creative entrepreneur, find your unique voice, find the right mindset to succeed, and be the first to capitalize on new opportunities to make a living making your art. I am David Cadavy. If you want to join us here on Love Your Work every Thursday, please hit subscribe on your podcast's app and get your free creative productivity toolkit. Sign up at cadavy.net/tools. Amber Ray was on the wrong path. She was swept up in the hype of the Silicon Valley startup scene. She was working too many hours on too many projects. She pushed herself so hard, she drove herself into anxiety, addiction, and eventually triggered a seizure. But Amber was doing some writing on the side, and that writing helped her discover what she was hiding from and find meaning in her past. In Amber's mess, she found the message. Now Amber helps entrepreneurs and creators develop emotional mastery. She's sharing what she's learned in her new book, Choose Wonder Over Worry, Move Beyond Fear and Doubt to Unlock Your Full Potential. In today's conversation, we're going to be talking about what is it that is easy for you, but is amazing to others. You're going to hear shortcuts you can take to find the secret superpower that might be hiding right beneath your nose. And how did Amber become a writer by accident? You're going to hear about the way she mentally framed the work she did, and how that held her back in some areas while propelling her forward in others. And what did Amber learn from working closely with Seth Godin? What did she do when Seth told her he thought the project she was working on would wind up a failure? Amber's a very exciting creator. There's much, much more in this conversation, so listen to hear the rest. Here is Amber Ray. I'm here with Amber Ray, and she's coming from Dumbo, Brooklyn. And it's been fun following your work. I have to say I have a little bit of personal brand envy. You have such a compelling and vibrant personal brand, and it's so honed and refined. But I have to imagine that didn't happen overnight. Can you give kind of a general timeline of how you ended up doing what you're doing with this book, Wonder Over Worry?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that comment. And it's funny you mentioned the word envy, because I always think of envy as inspiration
It's
disguised.
in there, yeah.
So immediately my brain went into like, well, what is the untapped potential of your brand? And what is it that you imagine for you? But yeah, I've been on a 10-year wild journey. I started my career working in marketing and branding, Apple, Dove, Frito-Lay, Kimberly-Clark. I was in the ad agency world. Then I moved into startups in Silicon Valley. And I'd say, the moment my personal brand really started was when I started a Tumblr blog back in, I think this was in 2009 when Tumblr was a big thing. And as a journal for myself to understand my emotions and the big questions I was asking in life, I began this blog to really journal and document my feelings and experiences. And, it started as a vehicle for me to see myself more clearly. And I never expected anyone would actually want to read this blog about some girl talking about how she feels about things. But I was wildly mistaken, and people started reading it and jumping in and saying, me too. And I also feel this way. And thank you for putting words to an emotion that I didn't know how to understand or decode or express. And so, I think that was the very first realization that through me sharing my vulnerability and my voice and my truth with the world, other people could see themselves through that. And, I had no idea what to do with that. It was just like, that's pretty cool. And wow, that feels really good. But from there, it was probably 6 or 7 years before I even knew that I could build a career or do anything out of that. I went on to start a publishing company with Seth Godin, worked with hundreds of creatives and entrepreneurs to bring their ideas and projects to the world. And, along the way was still documenting and sharing my story and discovering that I was an artist and, continuing to let that vulnerability be a thread of the work that I do. And so, I don't think I ever set out to create a personal brand. I just set out to tell my truth and to speak my truth. And It's funny that today that's sort of like what I'm known for. People say that they come to the writing because they know it's going to be real and it's going to be raw. And that through me talking about my emotional experiences, I can shed light on their own. So it was really, again, an accidental series of discoveries that led to me even today calling myself an author and an artist. I could have never imagined a decade ago that that's the life or the career trajectory that I would be living.
So you said it was 6 or 7 years before you started to realize that this was something that you could make a living at. Your specialty is helping people with emotional mastery, creativity, and personal growth. And during that period of time, you were helping other creatives and such. So was there a moment when you made that realization that, oh, I could be doing this?
Yeah, I read The Artist's Way, and I love Julia Cameron, and in it she talks about the notion of being a shadow artist. And a shadow artist, or I like to call it a closet creative, is someone who hides behind other creatives and helps them launch their ideas into the world because they're afraid of their own creativity. And I realized I was so good at being that behind the scenes person because I was afraid of being seen, and I was afraid of, I had so many fears, whether I'd be judged or if I would be rejected, or if I pursued a path of creativity, what if I failed? And because it was meaningful, it was easier to play it safe. And so I think it really, after helping so many authors launch best-selling books and helping different creatives and entrepreneurs build movements and build thriving businesses, it got to the point where I was becoming resentful of my clients. And that was really the moment when I had to pause and be like, okay, now, I loved being of service and I loved the work that I was doing, but it was getting to the point where it wasn't going to be a win-win because that was the energy that I was bringing to the relationship. And so I had a friend named Elle Luna, she wrote a book called The Crossroads of Should and Must, and she was a huge catalyst for me here. We did The Artist's Way. We went through actually the program together, and she bought me my first set of paints and was always nudging me. Like she saw I was an artist and saw that I wasn't pursuing it, and so beautifully would just slowly nudge me. And I feel like she was a huge catalyst for me to say, wait, I love supporting people, but I'm going to pause for a little bit just to see if I might be an artist too.
I think it's interesting that you were doing this writing that was raw and open, and yet you still had these fears about putting yourself out there in terms of that. That's why you were helping other artists and authors. And that those seem like incompatible views. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I don't know why it was easy for me to share through the written word. That was always like the most natural form for me. But, as a quote unquote career, I didn't even actually think I would do anything with the writing. I never thought, oh, maybe I'll turn this into a book, or that hadn't hit me yet. But like in terms of like the projects I did in the world, I thought that they had to be in service as a catalyst for others, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe you weren't thinking about the writing that you were doing as putting something out there, or were you just not thinking about it that way?
I think because I guess, I was putting work out there. I think I had really high expectations of myself in terms of I always thought I had to be doing more and I wasn't doing enough. And so it was as if the ways that I were expressing myself just wasn't good enough or worthy, and I had to do something bigger.
Did you think of yourself as a writer?
Today, absolutely. Today, a writer. I mean, I think that's the identity that I feel most home in.
But when you were doing that Tumblr or the Tumblr blog, did you even think of yourself as a writer?
Absolutely not. I was a marketer. I was a strategist. I was an entrepreneur. I was in the world of technology. So I think it was more about how I wanted others to perceive me. And I didn't think that I could be taken seriously, like as an artist or as a writer, and I even remember at one point someone saying that, writers write about the things that they can't do. Or that like, unless I was building businesses and being an entrepreneur, I wasn't creating anything of value.
Writers write about the things that they can't do. Oh, wow.
I don't know who said that, but it was interesting that I then, and it's so easy to take on other people's beliefs and stories as our own. And I remember taking that on and thinking, oh no, well, if I'm just writing, I'm not doing enough. The work I'm doing wouldn't be meaningful or impactful enough for the world.
That's interesting. It reminds me of those who can't do teach.
Yeah.
Which I always thought was strange because teaching is a skill that is, very difficult, and it can be more difficult than the skill that you're teaching. And same thing with writing. So I guess that, anyway, but I definitely resonate with this. It seems like you became a writer by accident.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I became a writer by accident, but it's the thing I've been doing my entire life the longest. It was just, I feel like it was because it was so easy for me. I remember Derek Sivers, I supported him with his book, Anything You Want. He's incredible. And he has this part in his book where he says, obvious to you, but amazing to others. And I feel like so often the things that come so natural to us, the things that we take for granted, the things we're like, well, writing's so easy, so why would I do anything with that? It has to be hard. It's like this desire for the struggle of what we create. And it was so obvious that I never thought it could actually be a part of my career.
Yes. I have experienced this where maybe I'll write about something that's very obvious to me, and I'm surprised at how it resonates with people. But that doesn't happen very often because I don't even think about the things that are obvious to me. Is there anything that you do to tap into the things that are obvious to you that might be mind-blowing to other people?
Yeah, I think something that I often do is I'll go to the people around me and I'll say, what is something that I've said to you recently that like really left a mark? Or, what are the big questions that you always come and are looking for my perspective on? Because I feel like when we're so in our own world, it can be difficult to see what's really resonating with someone. But when they can reflect back to you something that you said and how it impacted their life, I feel like that feedback loop is so key. And this is why, Instagram, I feel like, is the place where I test all of my ideas and concepts, both because it's visual. I can use art to be able to okay, how do I take a big idea around our emotions and actually turn it into a tiny square on Instagram? And then in the caption, what do I say and what do people comment on that they're like, that moved them and made them think something. And so I think so in our creative process, as much as we can have that feedback loop, or while I was writing my book and I'm beginning to work on my second book, I have a group of people that I'm testing ideas on, that I'm, I have these circles or they're almost like focus groups where I can test the ideas and see what's resonating, see what's landing, see what's sticking.
I like what you said about asking somebody about things that you said or did that had an impact on them or stuck with them. Because I can certainly think back to, that's not an idea that I typically solicit from people, but I certainly can think back to times when somebody made an observation about me. And I was like, oh, really? Am I? Can you think back to any of those observations that were made of you that really helped you make leaps forward?
Absolutely. I think the biggest one is that people always commented about how curious I was and about my inner world and how self-reflective I was and how introspective. And as a result of my inquiring within and asking myself the deep questions, it inspired them to ask themselves the same questions and to come to an aha moment or breakthrough. And I realized that so much of my style of teaching is that I don't tell people what to do, but I tell them what to ask. Because I'm a big believer that we hold the answers to, our biggest life questions. And if we can cultivate the practice of tuning inward, of asking, of creating a space for the answers to emerge, so much beauty and breakthrough can happen there. And so I vividly remember where I was sitting and the woman who sent me the very long-winded email about how my work had impacted her life and in what way. And it was that exact power. And so once she gave me that insight, I remember going to other people and saying, so here's what I've heard. And people are like, oh yeah, definitely. That's the thing that I always noticed about you. And I remember thinking that's so interesting because I would have never thought that my introspection was a useful quality. I would have just thought I remember certain family members when I was a kid telling me sometimes I was overthinking. And so I thought sometimes that my introspection was a bad thing. And maybe I was just thinking about things too deeply. But when in fact, that was actually something to really cultivate.
Yes. And so when you got that email from that woman and you started asking people about this introspection quality that you discovered in yourself, was that a part of, or was that a milestone or inflection point in this process of creating this brand that is so worthy of envy?
Yeah, I think that I think it was like through the raw, vulnerable storytelling, that's sort of my style. And then what I'm doing in that is that it's a mirror for people. And then I'm guiding them into their own introspection of journey. That led me to, I go to events and I bring I bring art, and on the other side of each piece of art is a question. And they're questions like, what are you avoiding and why? Or my childhood was ... Or if you knew the date of your death, would you want to know it? Why or why not? And so everywhere I go, I'm always inviting people into an inquiry. And that, because she mirrored that to me, that had me start thinking about, okay, well, how can I weave introspective and guiding people into meaningful conversation into every aspect of what I do and what I curate. And I'm in my loft in Brooklyn right now, which, by the way, if you hear a train passing, sorry, it's like rush hour in New York. But our place is called Wonderland. And when you walk in, there's these large, oversized Jenga blocks, and people pull out one of the Jengas, and on the other side is a question. And so it was a way, it helped to inspire me thinking about questions as an art form.
You say your place is called Wonderland. You mean your home is called Wonderland?
Our home is called Wonderland.
Tell us more about that.
Well, doing this work on the book, Choose Wonder Over Worry, and really like wonder, I feel like is that tool of curiosity. It's that, and I use wonder as a tool for self-discovery of asking myself better questions. And so when we moved into this, we're in like it's an old pencil factory that was converted into a loft building, exposed beams, exposed vents, and all the things, and exposed brick. And we wanted to create a space that would really at every touch point evoke curiosity and wonder. And so we designed the place with that in mind. And, both to like every morning I have different areas of the house where it's, no technology zones, and this is where this ritual happens. And when someone walks in, this is the ceremony or the initiation of them coming into our home. And just really thinking about how we can make this home in the center be the birthplace of that wonder.
So when somebody walks through the door and you begin this ceremony of inviting them, how does that go?
It's, they'll walk in, and even before. So if you walk to the door, there's a mirror on the door, and it says, I believe in you. And so you see yourself and it says, I believe in you. And then there's a card that says, choose wonder over worry. So people are like, okay. And it says, welcome to Wonderland. And so people walk in and they're like, what is going on? Where am I? And then, we welcome them in, and then we invite them to pull a question. And then oftentimes what's so crazy is that, like, for some reason, the one that's been really frequent that people have been pulling lately is, how do you set boundaries? And every time someone pulls it, they're like, ugh! They're like, why are boundaries following me everywhere? And so what tends to happen is that I feel like whatever question they pull is the question that is really present in their life in some way. And so it ends up leading into the conversation that we have and the space that we hold for them in our loft. Wow.
So are there any other milestones or inflection points along the road in recent memory to bring you to this point where you have this book, Choose Wonder Over Worry, and this brand that's worthy of envy?
I laugh every time you say worthy of envy. There's been so many. I think there's one that's recent. There was one that happened when I was 12 years old. Which, should I tell both?
Yes.
So I'll share the one that I feel like the inflection point of all the inflection points that was really a huge catalyst for me was, so my dad was a brilliant artist, singer, songwriter, and my mom says he was the most brilliant man she ever met, but also the most misdirected. And when I was a kid, he decided to leave to pursue music, and his band was called Dreamer. But unfortunately, he was very much in the time of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and really led these different addictions to get the best of him. And he got behind the wheel of a car under the influence and got into a serious accident that led his best friend to die immediately and sent him into a coma. And he was in this in-between space, never regained his full consciousness, and basically was brain dead, and finally passed when I was 12 years old after being in a hospital for, I think it was like 8 or 9 years. And so when he passed when I was a kid, there was both, of course, the process of grieving, but also I felt enormous relief because he was living in this in-between space and he could finally now transition and pass on. Mm-hmm. But what struck me, I remember having this thought. I was sitting in the guest bedroom of our house in the suburbs of Chicago, and I had this thought that I didn't want to die with my gift still inside. And I felt enormous anger at him that he got in his own way. He never faced his demons. And I made this vow with myself that I would face myself and that I would, I love what Todd Henry says, I would die empty. I, of course, wasn't calling it that then, but that's sort of how I can relate to it now. And so I feel like that's what led to an immense sense of curiosity and just this desire to explore life and live each day as fully as possible.
Actually, can we explore that a little bit? Because that's such a huge thing. I'm sure that you have, it's to you, it's your life. So it's an obvious thing. It's like water to a fish, but I'm sure you have gotten feedback that to outsiders, that is such an unbelievably tragic story that, and this isn't what I'm saying, but it's hard to believe even that it's just like so unbelievably tragic. And you can see how that could be extremely influential on a person. So you were 12 when you were 12 and you decided, I don't want to die with my gifts inside. Is that kind of the time that you were thinking that?
Yep.
And so was that something that you were aware of how it was affecting you in other ways, or was that a slow process of discovering how that experience affected you for the rest of your life?
I mean, I think it was, I'd say, like the biggest onion of my life that I was constantly peeling back the layers of, because it wasn't until my mid-20s when I realized that I had this pattern of dating emotionally unavailable men who would leave me, that I realized I had an unconscious belief that men I love would leave me because my father passed. And so I had, I was dealing with issues of abandonment that I was not even aware of. And so I feel like, in that moment as a teen, I felt what I felt in that moment, but I don't think I was aware of what I made it mean, and what I internalized until, a decade. And I'm even still now peeling back the layers because in my relationship with my fiance, I kept having this nightmare that he got in a car accident. Yeah. And so, I think there's still, grief impacts us in ways that we can't explain. There's still a healing process there, but something that I've done a significant amount of work on to realize that I will never leave me. And so I cannot abandon myself. And, when I anchor in that story, that's what has me not, focus on the external.
We're going to take a quick break. Today's sponsor is Babbel, the #1 selling language learning app in the world. I can tell you that learning a new language is very hard to do, but I can also tell you that it's very much worth it. Suddenly you can travel in a new place in comfort. You can interact with new people you wouldn't have otherwise. Hey, my girlfriend doesn't even speak English, so without learning some Spanish, that wasn't going to happen. With Babbel, you can learn Spanish, French, Italian, German, Russian, Swedish, and more. Babbel has a great interface on mobile and web for learning. They use interactive dialogues. They use speech recognition, which is super important because you're actually speaking your new language. And they also use fun trainers and quizzes. Most important, you'll get ready for all kinds of practical situations like chatting with new friends, ordering food, asking for directions, and more. This isn't a bunch of random stuff that you're never going to use, like mis medias son verdes, like my socks are green. You can try Babbel for free. Go to Babbel.com and use offer code LYW to get 50% off your first 3 months. That's Babbel, BABBEL.com. Offer code LYW for 50% off your first 3 months. And there was a second inflection point. What was that other one?
So this one's much lighter. This one's around like the focus of the book, which is a workshop I went to with Elizabeth Gilbert and Rob Bell. And this was, I think, about 3 years ago now. And I go to this workshop and some woman in the audience asked Liz, Liz, how do you do everything that you do? Or how did you really get your career going as an author? And I remember sitting in the audience and I go to this workshop and I was in a space where I was like, where am I focusing my energy? I was working on 12 different projects. I wasn't really taking my writing that seriously. My attention was spread across so many things because I was afraid of really committing to what I wanted most. And so I'm sitting in the audience and I'm like, Liz, tell me your secrets. And so she tells us this story about how when she was in her early 20s and she wanted to be writing, but wasn't really writing. And she's complaining to this wise older woman, as she explained her. And the woman says to her, well, Liz, if you want to claim the life that you say that you want, you have to say no to some things. And Liz is like, you're right. I totally need to say no to all of these things that people say that I should be doing. And the woman stopped her and said, no, you have to say no to things that you do want, with the understanding that there's things that you want even more. And that was a huge realization for me because I don't think I realized that I was afraid of commitment. And that's why I was trying so many projects at the same time. And that led me to, really go home, and I made 2 lists. And on the left sheet of the paper, I wrote, I want this. And on the right sheet of the paper, I wrote, I want this even more. And in the left side, there was like 17 things. I was working on a podcast and I was working on art mules around the world and I was speaking with companies and I was doing these, just so many things. And then on the right side, the only thing that I wanted more than all the other things was the book in bookstores. And, I think I always knew that I wanted to write a book, but I thought I wasn't good enough. Who am I to do this? I've been studying psychology inspired by my father's death since I was about 12. I remember soon after his death, I got my first book on psychology and I, haven't stopped studying it since. But, I'm not a psychotherapist. Who am I to talk about psychotherapeutic techniques? Who am I to talk about our emotions? I'm not a neuroscientist. I had all these worry stories in my head. And I realized that I don't need to get rid of them to write the book. Actually, that's part of the initiation. And, I'm a big believer that our mess can be our message. And it was only through the exploration of my own mess that I had a message to even share.
Speaking of messes being messages, I can relate so much to this, doing so many different things and having to make the tough decision sometimes to decide that you're not going to do a thing that you actually enjoy doing. But do you give any credit to the doing of so many different things in understanding better who you are, that enables you to now have this so well-defined brand and direction? Absolutely.
I feel like there's different phases in our life. There's when we're in the discovery phase, which is when we're, and so long as I feel like we're intentional about where we are, then it's great. We're in the discovery phase. Maybe we're exploring all the curiosities, trying on things, seeing what sticks, figuring out what really resonates and lands. And then we may move into the stage of really like defining and designing something. And then we may move into the stage of really like putting something out into the world. And so I feel like I was starting to live in that discovery phase for a little too long, where I wasn't really shipping the things that I wanted to ship, or I wasn't getting the level of depth that I wanted to experience around any one project because I was jumping from one thing to the next.
What was the thing or things that you wanted or enjoyed the most that you had to cut out in order to do the thing that you wanted the most?
Well, I stopped taking on clients, which basically cut my core source of income, because I realized that if I really wanted to write the book of my own, I wanted to pause on helping other people write their books. And so that was scary, of course, because, and I had savings up at this point, but I decided to pause there for a period of time so that I could really dive into my own book and story. And then I stopped I was doing public art all around the world. I stopped doing public art for a period of time. And it wasn't like I can never do these things again. It was all about the sequencing. It's like I wanted to do 19 things all at once, but realizing that there was going to be one thing that was actually going to be the catalyst for all those other things to become more possible. And so I think oftentimes, it's just about sequencing the priorities. And so now that I did book 1, that's being a catalyst for book 2. And now I'm building a new set of murals that go along with book 2. And so it's just a matter of knowing what goes where and what goes first. And sometimes we do the wrong thing until we figure out what actually feels more like the right thing. So there's no right or wrong. It's just around, I guess, what truly matters.
And as a podcaster and author, I'm curious what happened to your podcast.
Podcast totally got put on hold. It was called Dose of Wonder. And I don't know if I've been thinking about a podcast, but I don't know. It hasn't felt like the right time to bring it back yet. Maybe one day.
Yeah, I struggle with it myself. I mean, I've thought about this myself as, writing, I think, is more important to me than podcasting, but the podcasting is a part of the process for me. And I'm down in Colombia. I'm not in, a place like New York where you're kind of meeting interesting people all the time anyway. So it becomes this method of networking with interesting people. So that it's probably a different way of thinking about it. But I was curious because of that reason. How did you get involved with Seth Godin or working with him?
Yeah. So another big inflection point was a seizure and a series of panic attacks that happened when I was working in tech in Silicon Valley. And I think that was just my body's way of saying that I was so out of alignment with myself and what was true for me. I love Martha Beck's book, Finding Your North Star, and how so often our body is the signal for what is true and not true for us in our lives. And so that was a period of time where I was really living for everybody else and not myself, and following the path of success that I thought everyone, that other people wanted for me, but not pursuing what felt really true in my heart. And so when that became very clear, and my health became in question, that led me to quit my job, sell all my belongings, and move from San Francisco to New York in 72 hours. And I remember I was in the airport and I wrote a blog post, published it, got on the plane. And when I landed in New York, the piece had gone viral. And I had all of these people emailing me. I had a production company wanting to create a TV show. People wanted to hire me to work at their company. And I'm like, did you read my post where I said that I'm living for life's big questions and I don't want to any job right now? But that led me to do a ton of, this was a big period of discovery for me, a lot of experiments. I probably worked on 14 projects in 6 months. And one of them, many of them failed miserably. And one of them ended up on the front page of the New York Times. So it was such an interesting period of life. But that's what led, it was right around then that Seth put out a blog post on his blog that he was looking for accomplices to start a publishing company with him. And I remember 14 people sent me the blog post and were like, you must apply. This is you. Huh. And so I filled out the application. I remember it took me 14 hours. And then of all the people who applied, he picked 22 of us to go do this 2-day interview in his house, or in his studio. And so I went up there, and I remember after the 2 days, I'm thinking there's no way that he's going to choose me to be a part of this experience. It was the most interesting interview process ever. I remember at one point, there was how do you deal with fear? And I was like, I don't know. And, but anyway, he ended up choosing me and 7 others to be a part of the Domino Project. And I was the chief evangelist. So my role was to figure out how do we spread the ideas of these books as far as possible.
What did you learn from Seth?
Oh man, so much. It was the most uncomfortable 6 months. It was a 6-month project, the most uncomfortable 6 months of my entire life, and probably some of the most important 6 months of my life. I learned from him the power of sitting in the discomfort. I learned from him, I remember going into it and I wanted Seth to like me and approve of me and know that I do good work. And instead, he challenged us to fail and make mistakes and have things not work out. And I was such a perfectionist that the idea of making a mistake, I made that mean that I was flawed. And so all my beliefs around success and failure and creativity and risk taking really all came into question. And I feel like, so many of my anxieties came to the surface of wanting his approval. And again, this actually ties into the whole male father figure type thing. I saw Seth as this person that I, of course, this figure that I wanted approval from. But he really, taught me to make more mistakes and to see failure as learning and to be okay with not knowing and to ask better questions. And every day we would leave his office and we would write down 3 ideas that we had for the day. So I was constantly, he was priming my brain to think about new ideas and innovations. And it was, it was probably one of the most powerful experiences of my life.
Do you remember a particular instance of struggling with that discomfort?
Oh, yeah. So, I'm pretty sure we all cried or had a breakdown at some point. I actually fainted one day from probably the pressure. And I fainted and passed out, and he almost took me to the hospital. And then I went home.
What was the situation?
I don't even remember what triggered it, to be honest. I just remember being in and out of consciousness on his couch. But the one situation I remember is when he called on me in the group and he was like, Amber, do you want to go on a car ride and run an errand with me? And I was so petrified. And so I get in the car with him, and it was so interesting because around Seth, I would I wanted this good girl persona would take over me, where I wanted to be the good girl and wanted him to like me.
I know the feeling.
And of course, Seth isn't gonna say, I approve of you and you're enough. He's going to encourage you to, find that within yourself. And so we're taking this car ride and he's asking me, do you work well in team environments or do you prefer to work alone? And I think I was still learning I was so used to being a solo worker, that I was still learning how to work as a team. And I just remember being so afraid and so, wanting him to tell me I'm doing okay.
And were you afraid of saying the wrong thing when he asked you that question about working by yourself or with a team?
Oh, totally. I feel like I was always afraid of doing the wrong thing. And what I learned through that journey is that there was no wrong thing, and it's okay, do the wrong thing and then figure out the right thing.
But he kind of wouldn't show his cards as far as what he thought about what you were doing.
Yeah, exactly. There were times where he was like, great job on this, but it was more about how do we source that from within.
But do you remember a particular project that you were working on where you were afraid of failing?
I think every project, so I was the CEO of Derek Sivers' book, and then I was in charge of figuring out how we spread the idea, how we sell as many books as possible for all the other books. And I think I was, just afraid in general that I was going to fail at all the things. Mm-hmm. There was one though that I remember, and I feel really that I felt proud of, which was we were working on Ralph Waldo Emerson. It was called I can't remember, but we took one of his books and we modernized it. And along with that, I came up with the idea, let's do a 30-day reflection challenge where we'll gather different influencers on the internet and they'll each give us a different question. And we'll take people who sign up through this reflective journey, because the Rolf book was all around trusting yourself and self-reliance and introspection and reflection. And I remember Seth thinking I think he said that's not going to work. Or he didn't love the idea for whatever reason. And Alex, who was the CEO of that book, and I decided to go ahead and do it anyway. And it was so successful. And so people were so obsessed that one day an email didn't go out and our CTO was something went down because so many emails were sent because people were where's my question of the day? And so it ended up being this really powerful ritual and exercise and creative concept for people to really do that reflective work. So that was when I was like, yes, and what was so funny is that the work was about that project and that book was about trusting yourself. And so that's what we were being invited to do.
Where do you think you got the courage to go ahead and do it, even though Seth said that it wouldn't work? Was that fairly far along in the process?
Yeah, and I mean, he would always he would sometimes be like, I don't. But he said you don't have to do what you want. He was always encouraging. It's like there was no rule book. There was no I'm the person and I have the answers. It was like I'm going to give you my opinion, but take it or leave it. And so that that was just an environment I wasn't used to because when I was working in the advertising world or I was in the agency world, whatever my boss thought was the way that we went. They drove the ship and then we followed and created a strategy from there. It wasn't like that at all. It was very, you create your own destiny here and do what you think is right. And so I think it was both that what's interesting is that, again, this goes back to, for me, the power of introspection and questions and me seeing that as a powerful tool. And so I really was so I just intuitively was bought into that concept and had this deep inner sense that we have to do this. I don't know why I think it's going to work. And then I think the teamwork and the collaboration of me with Alex, and Alex really was bought into it as well and had a sense. And so I think it was, our unity around wanting to give it a try that is what really had us go ahead and see what was possible.
And so you were putting things out there, not knowing what was going to happen, very much like it all started with that tumble log. And I can see so much in what you've told us here, not only literally, but also metaphorically in this book, Choose Wonder Over Worry. Can you talk a little bit about the things that you learned writing this book?
Oh man, I feel like the book made me as I made it. It's interesting when you choose to write about a topic called Choose Wonder Over Worry, because literally I was being initiated into that possibility or spiral.
Nothing's more worry-inducing than writing a book.
Yeah, especially so I got my book deal. My publisher asked me, can you write this in 3 months? And I was like, hell yeah, I can. Choose and wonder over worry. And, I made it happen. And I'm glad it was that short, but it was all my worries came to the surface in writing the book. Particularly, writing a blog is one thing, putting out your work on Instagram and having it be vulnerable, but having it actually printed inside pages that are going to forever be on bookshelves, it feels a little bit different. And so I think the reality of, because I talk about turbulence in my relationship. I talk about my father's death. I talk about my fear of abandonment. I get so raw. And I'm so honest that I was terrified that I would be, rejected and judged. But what I found so interesting is that the thing that I was afraid of was never as scary as the actual experience of it. So what I imagined in my head of people hating and rejecting and writing negative reviews about the book. I remember when I read the first negative review and I was like, okay, that wasn't so bad. And one thing Seth also taught me is that if you try to please everyone, you please no one. And that when your work is polarizing, that's actually a good thing because then it's really for someone. And I found that so clearly with this, that people either really love it or it's not for them. And that's great. So
that's funny. All the reviews I've seen were positive. So,
well, not on Goodreads, on Amazon.
Goodreads, they're tougher.
People are really nice on Amazon. Well, and also my publisher sent my advanced reader copy to a bunch of people to get a review, and my advanced reader copy is a drastically different book than the book that I published.
Oh wow, yeah, yeah, that'll do it. Yeah. So. I would really highly encourage everybody to go get this book. Amber really bears all in this. You hear some of the stories you heard here, but so much more. And there's so many different worry myths to overcome, like should and comparison and hustling for approval, and so much more that we could have dug into today. But I would really encourage everybody to go get this book. Do you have a final message that would wrap up our conversation for today?
Ooh. A final message. We went in so many directions. What's coming to mind for me right now that's been present with people who are reaching out to me is that I find so often that in creativity or in making anything, we often think about who we're creating for and what we can create to serve or help others. And if there's anything that I've learned, especially in writing this book, is that when you heal your own toothache, which is something that El Luna said to me, which she borrowed from Picasso, is that when we heal our own ache, that actually is the work that both serves us and really heals us, and then actually may make an even greater impact or difference to the world around us. So I would encourage you listening to really create that thing that is for you. Create that thing that really serves and energizes and moves and heals your journey.
That's something I'm constantly trying to remind myself to do. Where can people get more of you?
You can get more of me. So I'm on Instagram, Hey Amber Ray, and I love posting there and sharing all sorts of visuals. So I would love to hear from you. If there's something from this interview that resonated with you, leave a comment, say hi so I know who you are. And I'm also, my website's amberray.com, where you can find all kinds of blogs and fun information. And then everything around the book is at choosewonder.com.
Amber Ray, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Is Love Your Work helping you find your unique creative voice? Does it bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to become the creator and human you want to be? If so, please be a part of making this a special and nourishing and thoughtful show. Support the show on Patreon. You'll be an even bigger part of this show than you already are. If you contribute just a coffee a month, you'll be helping support the hosting and production of Love Your Work. Everyone has some unique creative gift to offer the world. Together, we can give people the tools they need to bring that work into the world. The world will be better off for it. Visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/Cadavy. This is a different kind of model for supporting the work you love. The choice is yours. Vote with your dollars, put your money where your mind is, and keep Love Your Work going. Visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/Cadavy. As a thank you, you'll get early access, bonus content, and a discount on Love Your Work merchandise. Learn more at patreon.com/Cadavy. That's patreon.com/KA, D as in David, A, V as in Victor, Y. Love Your Work is brought to you in part by our Patreon supporters, such as mini sponsors Roxana Maynard of Agility Alchemist at agilityalchemist.com and Julian Power of julianpower.co, as well as top supporters such as Jeffrey Mason and Vitas Pankovichis. This has been Love Your Work, and I'm David Cadavy. The theme music for this show is At Sea by Dorena from the album About Everything and More by arrangement with Deep Elm Records at deepelm.com. Love Your Work is a production of Cadavy, Inc.